One of my first questions was going to be, is there a shortage of ISL interpreters in Ireland? And I think by your last comment there, 140 in the country, you're indicating there is a shortage.
If I can just say that, yes, as I said, in Finland there's 500 to service the same population. We have just been awarded IREC funding to study barriers to studying to be an ISL interpreter, graduating successfully, entering the workforce and staying in the workforce. Many of the interpreters are currently part-time. There are some short-term fixes, but it needs a medium and long-term strategy as well. And I think all of our members in the DPO network would accept that instant solutions to problems don't happen. And our frustrations are in relation to developing agreed plans about how to solve them, and we can be co-creators of those plans. We can have skin in the game, and when it goes wrong together. But certainly we're hoping, as the state ramps up engagement, particularly with the deaf community in relation to your question on ISL interpreters, that when they can't be booked, that representatives in public bodies join us in our call for trying to improve this, rather than seeing this as a reason why engagement can't be done.
I had an email just today from a parent of a young lad who's in college, and he's deaf, and sometimes there's an ISL interpreter available and sometimes there isn't, and when there isn't, he has a note taker, and that's just taken away his independence. So I don't know whether it's just the college are failing to make the effort to book all of the time, or whether they just can't get an ISL interpreter as it is. And one of her suggestions, and it was something that I had been following up with, getting nowhere, was why is ISL not a subject in school? It is a recognised language since I think 2017, but you know, I kept getting put from the Department of Education to you know, I can't think of the name, but the NCC is the national curriculum, and you know, never could get a straight answer. There was one saying something else had to happen first, and so forth. But I think, you know, it's something that should be considered. Definitely. And I mean, you've indicated there with the work and access scheme that there's a shortage of ISL interpreters. You've also indicated that that scheme, as you said, wasn't co-created, so there wasn't the proper engagement, which is a direct contravention of the UNCRPD. So, I mean, departments are still not listening. Like, we've had a Department of Social Protection in here, and we've talked about the fact that they should be talking to DPOs, and we had the example of the Green Paper on Disability Reform, and there was no prior engagement on that either. So it's something that needs to happen, and as you say, it could be formed properly from the beginning without having to be changed. In relation to inclusive education, because you say that's important as well, and I agree with you, I feel though it's very under-resourced, and you have to buy in from parents to send their children to mainstream schools which have maybe a special class or an autism class attached. But many parents I talk to won't do that because there aren't enough properly trained staff within the autism classes or the special classes. One parent was telling me that her son he actually regressed in the autism class, and she then enrolled him in a special school, but it wasn't easy to get him into the special school. So until we get buy-in from parents, and we won't get buy-in from parents until they're properly resourced, so we need to see a lot more resources going into mainstream schools to support students with disabilities or additional needs going to those schools and not choosing to go to the special school. And in relation to the special school as well, there's no career guidance, I don't think, or is that being addressed now, do you know, in the special schools?
We do have career guidance within the school, but not specifically targeted towards what it is in terms of employment and goals for career. We need specialised career guidance counsellors, and as John was saying, there isn't enough ISL interpreters, and oftentimes there isn't enough even for an emergency. There isn't an emergency 24-hour available interpreter if a deaf person had to go to hospital. I mean, it all boils down to an agency making contact with an interpreter and hoping somebody will answer the phone in the middle of the night. Or in the northwest of Ireland, there's very few interpreters in that area. So that's a high risk area for deaf people to live in terms of if you have an emergency. So in terms of education, employment, everywhere is impacted. All of that is impacted by the number of available interpreters. I would like to see more investment in ISL interpreter career engagement and advancement and employed positions. And self-employment as well, how do you access interpreters for that? So as the House of Oireachtas has employed interpreters, there isn't enough employed in-house interpreters in other institutions in colleges. One example where there is one is TCD, DCU, but as you were just giving that example there of a student who doesn't have access to an interpreter every day, that's because the college doesn't have the resources or is having limited availability of interpreters in that particular area. So as John said, in Finland, the population of deaf people is similar to here, but they have a higher number of interpreters. So there needs to be more investment in interpreter training here and interpreter retention in that career.
Maybe just a comment about ISL in schools. You know, we all of us hearing people here will have grown up through a primary and post-primary education where we received an English language class every day. Deaf children do not receive ISL classes. They don't receive tuition in other subjects through their own language. And there's an educational barrier that further impacts employment, the notion of self-employment at a later age. You know, so like we would accept that there are a lot of problems that need to be addressed, and we're all very much on a journey to try and address those. But, you know, I'd like to focus on a core problem that we can solve today, and that's talking to us about services for us. Meaningful engagement, although it won't solve everything immediately, it will allow us to see that we're working together to solve things together. So there needs to be transparency and engagement on funding allocations, how disability budgets are being spent. We need to be involved in those decisions and not just told what they are. And I think that's really something that we'd like to focus on. And under UNCRPD, if DPO organisations, of which there are much less of them in Ireland than there should be, and we're hoping that there will be more and more as disabled people are empowered to form their own organisations, if we're to engage, we need funding to engage. Often we're sitting at the meeting table and the disabled person is the only unpaid person there, perhaps in a voluntary capacity. Now, the Irish Deaf Society is a company, it's got paid employees, but many of our members and other disabled people appear in a voluntary capacity, but are expected to give critical analysis and feedback to a professional cohort of policy developers on the same level. And, you know, what we'd like to see is some funding for DPOs to provide this kind of feedback. There's no funding for that today. None of our DPOs are funded to provide meaningful engagement. And some capacity and capability improvements and delivery programmes help us to help you, and we can all help each other to progress on achieving meaningful and effective service delivery, and gradually over time we will solve these problems together.
Yeah, the point you've made has been made by many people who've appeared as witnesses here, that they are often the only unpaid person in the room, and yet they're the expert in the room. And some DPOs, smaller DPOs that have been formed, they are told, oh well, get charitable status and then you can apply for different forms of funding. But as I said, we're not charities. We are disabled people advocating for ourselves, and they shouldn't be treated. We need to move away from the charitable model. So, I mean, the Minister had promised to put together a register of DPOs. So that still hasn't happened, and I think the progress on that is very slow, but it's something that we hope to see happen. So then, I mean, different public bodies and departments then know exactly who they should be engaging with, depending on the nature of the policy or whatever they're doing, that they can engage with the appropriate DPO.
Yeah. Okay. I was at an IREC orientation event today related to our funding related to interpreters, and we were talking about research fatigue and disabled people and deaf people who are subject to being involved in research. And a lot of people don't see the point in getting involved in advocacy, policy work, research, because they don't see the results happening. Now, if there was a growing culture of meaningful engagement and we could see we were working with the state to make developments, okay, the results may not be happening as quickly as we'd like, but there would be an incentive there for people to get involved. There are a lot of disabled people and deaf people who have strong voices and clarity of thought and advice and strategy on all of this, but they're having difficulty being involved.